This is Lisa Schwartz at Berkeley Lab. Welcome to the webinar for our new report, Time-Sensitive Value of Efficiency, Use Cases in Electricity Sector Planning and Programs. Before I turn over the mic for today's presentations, here are a few housekeeping items. First, we're recording the webinar and we'll post it on our website. Because of the large number of participants today, everyone is in listen mode only, but please use the chat box to send us your questions or comments at any time. I'll moderate questions with the authors following the presentation, and then the report and webinar slides are posted at the website shown at the bottom of the slide. Following the webinar, we'll post a recording. So today our presenters are first, David Nemso. He is Director of the Building Technologies Office for the U.S. Department of Energy's Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy. He has more than 3 decades of experience, including running the Energy Utilities and Water Department in New South Wales, Australia, leading the Alliance to Save Energy, a bipartisan nonprofit association, and consulting. Natalie Mintz-Frick is an Energy Efficiency Program Manager in the Electricity Markets and Policy Group at Berkeley Lab. She conducts energy efficiency research, provides technical assistance to states, and manages a wide variety of projects. So our agenda today is first to talk about what is the time-sensitive value of efficiency and why do we care. We'll provide an overview of our earlier research on this topic, and then we'll specifically talk about the new report, and then I will moderate Q&A with David and Natalie. David, take it away.
Great. Thanks, Lisa, and happy morning and afternoon and perhaps evening to all the folks online. So look, why do we want to value energy efficiency on a time-sensitive basis? The answer is quite obvious, because the cost of producing energy varies on a time-sensitive basis. And of course, I'm talking about electricity. And the cost varies over the course of the day and the week and the season. And on the upper right is a basic graph. I'll show you a couple of other variants on it of demand from different products. You probably can't read that little printing, but it's things like water heaters and air conditioners and furnace fans. And so in this case, big surprise at around 6 or 7 in the afternoon or evening, depending on the local conditions, demand is at its highest, and it's most expensive for the power system in just about all parts of the country, and if not the world, most expensive to produce electrons at that time and get them through the T&D system to the end user. So if we can save energy then through energy efficiency, it'll be more valuable. So we have to understand that. We have to understand the economic value both of producing and then the energy at different times of day, and that's been, there's obviously a lot of data on that, but also what are the efficiency measures, and then what can we do about that? And that's the work that Berkeley Lab has led for a number of years, that Natalie Frick and Lisa Schwartz and their team have done pioneering work. So why don't we go to the next slide, please? So here's a slide, summer day in Texas, a year and a half ago. So if you look at it, and we put in big print what we want you to get out of it, but look at the blue line first, the top line. You'll see there's 2 y-axes on this graph. So the daily peak in the ERCOT system on this July day, like a typical curve. It's not a duck curve. There's not enough PV there, but a typical curve, right? At 6 a.m. it is at its low point for this July day, and it's a weekday, a Monday. And then at around 4:35 p.m., you can see the peak, over 70,000 megawatts for the system. And and then if you look at the red line, the settlement price, it of course doesn't precisely track the demand, but it's sensitive to it. In fact, if anything, it's hypersensitive to it. So at those same days, as the peak goes up a bit, the settlement price goes up considerably. I don't know the specifics of this situation, but I'm guessing it's when electrons are in greatest demand, when the fleet is using its least efficient, highest heat rate, most costly power plants, naturally saving those for the end of the, for the as few hours as possible, and so the clearing cost is quite high. And so then when we think about that, and the third line is residential air conditioning demand, and in a hot, dry climate like Texas, it pretty dramatically goes up during the day and then it cools off at night. If this were Miami, that would be a flatter curve, but in Texas, in the Southwest, that's typical. So you're running the air conditioners, in this case residential in total, are running the most in that late afternoon. That's fortunate. It's the most expensive time of day. Or unfortunate if you're the user of the air conditioner. This isn't a coincidence because that peak demand is being driven in most of the country, place like Texas, by air conditioning. So there you go. Next slide, please. Same thing, just December. This is December of just about a year ago, also a weekday. And in this case, since it's December, air conditioning isn't the driver. But look at this. This is a heat pump water heater that we're modeling, and it's a very similar situation in which the morning, as resistance heatings and heat pump water heaters and other things are online, you get a peak. It makes the cost most valuable. And therefore, that red line of how much it costs to get those electrons, boy, if we could save then, we'd be really doing well. It's always good to save energy. It's always good to use it more efficiently. It's just that much better during those most stressful, most expensive times when resilience is challenged, and often when emissions are the highest. Those tend to travel together. Next slide, please. So why do we use it? I hope you already know this, but everything I've talked about has been true for the century plus since we've had a power grid in this country. But it's become more important lately for several reasons. One is the increased use of distributed energy resources, particularly photovoltaics, wind, and storage. And that's changed the shape of the curves, and it's also added a new dimension, not just the daily cycle of it, but the moment-by-moment cycle as we try to, as we work to integrate those renewables. We want to see if demand management and energy efficiency can do that job, can help shape these curves to when they're most valuable, so we have to understand that. There's also been, of course, you can look down anywhere now at your desk, at your phones, all the smart and connected equipment. That gives us new opportunity. And then finally, the retirement of traditional fossil fuel generation plants changes the mix. So that's why it's as important, if not more important than ever. But then it's also, there's an opportunity now for anybody who designs programs or who runs programs or activities to take advantage of that. Look, I'm one of those people. I run the Building Technologies Office at the U.S. Department of Energy. We have a very large research program, and we now ask ourselves in a way we didn't a few years ago, is our research program for new energy-efficient technologies focused on saving energy where it's most valuable? It might be heat pumps, it might be HVAC, but again, saving energy through exit signs is great, but exit signs are 24/7. It doesn't focus on the peak. And others out there, it's not just an R&D issue. Anybody on this call who runs a utility program, or is it a PUC staff or state energy office staff or a local government, et cetera. And if you're trying to integrate renewables, if you're trying to lower cost to the system as a whole by saving energy where it's most productive, that's why you should care. Next, please. And we're going to help you care by showing you how to do it. Now, quickly, a shameless promotion for activity we're doing here at the U.S. Department of Energy called Grid Interactive Efficient Buildings. I'm going to call it GEB to save valuable nanoseconds here. So this is a building of the future, right, with all these connected smart devices, some of which are directly about energy, EV chargers and batteries, and some are busy doing something else, providing lighting, providing heating, cooling, PV systems. So this is the world we're trying to, this interactive, grid interactive technologies that we're trying to promote and and accelerate here at US DOE, as I suspect many of you are. And we do that for all sorts of reasons. I don't have time for that today, but we can't do it effectively without understanding the timing of when things happen. We don't want things just to be smart. We want them to be grid sensitive. So therefore, how can we provide through these technologies? How can we provide value when the value is most appreciated by the grid? Next, please. So this is a schema of the thing you saw before. Again, you see the occupant. He or she comes first. We're trying to meet their needs. You have above them the technologies, including the control technologies. And then to the right, you have the utility signal. So we want to make sure when you have those control technologies that it's not only meeting the needs of the occupant, but it's meeting the needs of the occupant in a way that can also maximize what the utility is up to with utility signals. Next, please. So a quick graphic on why one wants buildings to be GEBI, and you can already see why time-sensitive valuing is necessary to quantify what I'm about to say. We break it into 4 categories, and again, thanks to Lawrence Berkeley Lab for helping us and others helping us think this through. Top left, efficiency, right? Lower demand at any or all times that it's cost-effective and works. That's traditional efficiency. And we have all sorts of solutions to that, smart as well as unsmart. Next is load shed, where we focus that on the peak time. You can call it demand response if you want, and that makes perfect sense. And we clip the peak, the expensive, most stressful time. Bottom left is load shift. Pre-cooling or preheating can do the job. But it's also load shift matters as more systems, especially pick your favorite, Hawaii, California, Arizona, have more and more photovoltaics and have a duct belly that provides a lot of cheap, if not free, clean electrons to be had. So we're shifting demand. And finally, modulate. The difference here is you'll see the x-axis is sub-seconds to seconds, not hours. We're trying to modulate as there's changes in the supply mix. And that could be for frequency purposes, but why not for cloud cover in a PV-heavy system or in a wind system? Can we use demand management to help balance the load in a very dynamic way? So that's what we're trying to do. And to quantify that, we need to understand the valuation. We need to understand the work that Natalie will talk about it in a minute. Next slide, please. This is our portfolio at BTO on what we're doing in this area of GEB, and just to underscore the top left here, of course, is valuation. How do we do this as rigorously data-driven, as scientific as possible? And to steal one of Natalie's points, but an essential one, it's a big country, and in this 320 million people who live here, there's no one answer on time-sensitive valuation. Every system's different, every locality is different. So there's some truths that cross across many, if not all of them, but there's going to be a lot of answers on time-sensitive valuation around the country and around different utility systems. Next, please. I'm going to turn it, with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Natalie. I think at the end you'll see the URL. You can just Google us at, I don't know, Google BTO, DOE, and GEB, G-E-B, and you'll get a collection of all the resources we have. Thanks a lot. Natalie?
Thanks, David. There's also some links on your earlier slides that will get you to the Grid Interactive Efficient Buildings webpage for BTO as well. And those slides will be available to everyone at the end of this presentation. And one of our listeners was asking who you were, but that's David Nemso, the Director of Building Technologies Office, for if anyone was wondering if they came in late. And I'm Natalie Frick. I'm with Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. And I'm going to provide some background on LBL's work on the time-sensitive value of efficiency. And then I'm going to talk about our new report that was recently released. And we can go to the next slide. Thank you. So these are pictures of our 2017 and 2018 publications on the time-sensitive value of efficiency. We had a variety of motivations for studying the time-sensitive value of efficiency. Primarily, we wanted to advance consideration of the value of efficiency measures during peak demand and high electricity prices. We also wanted to increase the awareness of available end-use load shapes. Next slide, please. We had 3 goals with our research. We wanted to calculate the time-sensitive value of efficiency. We wanted to recommend methodologies to appropriately value efficiency. And we wanted to consider changes to the valuation methodologies that would address the changing shape of the electricity system. And so our approach for both of these studies was the same. We used publicly available end-use load shapes and avoided cost for 5 states or regions, which are listed here on the slide, and for 5 electricity measures, which are also listed here. The one exception to the publicly available statement was that in Michigan, we worked directly with the Public Utility Commission and the utilities, and so they provided us with information that we probably wouldn't have had access to otherwise. We chose these 5 measures because they're representative of large portions of efficiency portfolios for a lot of utility providers. And then our exit sign was kind of showed us what would happen if you saved energy for every hour of the year, since it's on 8,760 hours of the year. Next slide, please. So this graph shows the annual electricity system load shape for the 5 states that we used in the reports. And the vertical axis is the percentage of system peak, and the horizontal axis is each month of the year. And we used different states and regions for different reasons. We chose the Pacific Northwest because they're winter peaking, which you can tell from the blue line that is up around 100% is the Pacific Northwest. I've creatively colored all of these lines blue, so it's a little bit difficult to tell which one I'm speaking about, but the one that goes up to 100% in January and December is the Pacific Northwest, and the rest of our regions are all summer peaking systems. Next slide, please. And these are the results for the Pacific Northwest from our 2017 study, and we have bar charts like this for each one of the regions available in that report, and there's a link to it on the first slide that had the picture. The vertical axis is the levelized value of the efficiency savings, and the horizontal axis are our different measures, and each color in the bars represents a different component of avoided cost, and the different regions have different avoided costs. So for the Pacific Northwest, we relied on the 7th Power Plan from the Northwest Power and Conservation Council, and for their avoided cost values, and then we use the RBSA and LCAP for end-use load shapes, which are metering studies from the Pacific Northwest. And so what these bars show us are the different values, and as you can see, what's interesting for the Pacific Northwest, in contrast to our other regions, was that the residential air conditioning did not have as much value as our other measures, because the Pacific Northwest is a winter peaking system, and so savings that occur during the summertime aren't worth as much to the system as savings that occur in the wintertime, such as residential lighting. So that was one of the conclusions that came out of that study. If we can go to the next slide. This chart is a summary of the results from both the 2017 and the 2018 study, and this shows the ratio of total energy savings to energy-only savings for each one of the measures in each one of the regions. And the last 3 clusters on the right side of the slide are all for Michigan, where we use different end-use load profile sources. And as you can see in California and Massachusetts, that yellow bar that goes up really high, that has a very high ratio of total value to energy-only value, shows that there's a lot of capacity from distribution system avoided costs and avoided generation capacity costs, but mostly distribution system that generated this higher ratio between those other values and energy only. And in the summertime in California and Massachusetts, those savings are aligned with the system peak, so they generated a lot of value. Some of the other conclusions that we came from the study are that first, publicly available data on end-use load and energy savings is limited, and so fortunately, Building Technologies Office is funding an end-use load profile project that should help mitigate that, and we'll have more data sources for end-use load profiles that are more accurate. Another conclusion we have was that all of the costs matter. So in Georgia, the bars that are kind of right in the center of the chart, publicly available data didn't include avoided transmission and distribution system values. So a lot of the ratios for these measures are right around 1, meaning that there isn't additional value beyond the energy-only value because we didn't have access to that information. And so it appears that the time-sensitive value of measures in Georgia is lower, but what actually is happening there is that we just didn't have as much data. And then another conclusion that came from these reports were that accurate load shapes matter. And so looking at the 3 clusters on the right side of the chart that are from Michigan show how the ratio of the total time-sensitive value to the energy-only changes based on different assumptions. So the first cluster of Michigan assumes that the total and energy-only values are identical for residential and commercial lighting, and so there's only energy savings, and that's why that red and pink bar are right at 1. And then in the second cluster, we use the Michigan Energy Measure Database, and we use coincidence factors and some of their modeling to determine the value of efficiency, which produced values that were probably more accurate and also closer to the third grouping of bars where we used metered data from the Pacific Northwest and applied it to the savings in Michigan. And so just an example of how using different assumptions produces significantly different results. So next slide, please. So that was some background on the work that we've done thus far, and now we have this new report that we just were able to publish, funded by Building Technologies Office, so thank you for that. And next slide, please. Thank you. We need to go back just one. And our new report, thank you. Our new report identifies and describes use cases and specific examples of implementing the time-sensitive value of efficiency. So we used the first 2 reports to quantify it, and now we're talking about how examples we could find of people using it. And the 5 use cases that we discuss in this report are efficiency planning, distribution system planning, resource planning, rate design, and state and local government activities. And there's a link at the top that will take you to the report if you're interested in downloading it. And our approach for the study drew on our experience from our prior research, and we also created a technical advisory group. And our technical advisory group was composed of people from utilities, public utility commissions, energy offices, universities, and consulting firms. And we used them to help identify data gaps, to guide the study, and review the draft report. And then we did a pretty extensive literature review, and we leveraged some of our prior research on the cost of saving electricity, including our new report on the cost of saving peak demand, and work from our future of ratepayer-funded efficiency, and also some research we're doing now on efficiency and resource planning. And so the examples that I'm going to walk through are not a comprehensive list of all of the uses of the time-sensitive value of efficiency, but they are meant to represent a range of opportunities. Next slide, please. Okay, so my first example of implementing the time-sensitive value of efficiency is on the cost-benefit analysis. And energy efficiency benefit-cost analysis compares the benefits and costs from different perspectives, and a benefit-cost ratio of 1 means the measure or program has positive benefits and is cost-effective. And if it's less than 1, it means the costs are exceeding the benefits. So some utilities use annual, hourly, or 8760 efficiency data to determine when efficiency occurs and what the financial value is associated with those savings. And other utilities use on and off-peak periods, or an average annual avoided cost, or a less granular data set to determine this. So this is an example in California of 8760 analysis. This is the California Public Utility Commission's avoided cost calculator, which is a publicly available tool that the CPUC uses to forecast long-term marginal cost and evaluate the cost effectiveness of efficiency and other DERs, or distributed energy resources. And it's important to note that the CPUC staff issued a recommendation in November about the avoided cost calculator, so it is in the process of being updated, and the approach that's being used to determine these values is changing right now. But regardless, for this slide, they were using 8760 data, and it shows that an example output of the cost calculator and the average hourly value of energy in Climate Zone 4 for 2019 and 2024. And you can see that energy efficiency or other DERs that provide or save electricity during hour ending 18, which is 5 to 6 p.m., produce significant system value both from distribution, capacity, energy savings, and it's about $100 a megawatt hour more in 2024 than it is in 2019 in terms of the value of those savings or of generating during that time. So not only is there a daily time value, but there's also a value that changes as you look into the future. We can go to the next slide, please. Thanks. So my next example is on energy efficiency program planning. And this is from Xcel Energy. And actually my next two slides are both on efficiency and program design. And this chart is an excerpt from the results of a study that Xcel did on the time-sensitive value of efficiency. And the impetus for their study was that they found that with more wind and solar coming online, their avoided costs and energy efficiency cost effectiveness were declining. So they wanted to explore how they could target efficiency programs that save energy when their marginal avoided costs and emissions values were high. And so Wilden, Xcel's consultant, used 8760 data, so annual hourly energy data, and they considered the impact of 20 different strategies on 10 different projects in Xcel's Commercial Design Assistance Program, which is a commercial new construction program. And they identified which strategies could reduce costs and emissions the most. This is just 4 of the strategies. All of the strategies are listed if you click on the link for this slide where I have the source. So the metrics that were used in the study are site BTU, cost, and carbon dioxide savings both in 2018 and in 2028, which is what each one of those bars represent. And so these are 4 of the strategies, and the examples highlight measures that are cost effective and produce carbon savings today and in the future, which is the reduced lighting power density, the third cluster of bars. So all of the bars are positive. And then also measures that will become cost effective or produce carbon savings in the future, which is the heat pump and variable refrigerant flow, which is the second group of bars. So right now in 2018, it's not producing carbon savings, but looking forward it will. Another one of the examples shows measures that aren't cost effective today, but will become in the future, which is the electric solar water heating storage, the last cluster of bars. Has cost savings, cost savings both today and in the future, but doesn't have carbon savings today or in the future. And then the last example shows the electric reheating coils doesn't produce carbon savings today or in the future, but does produce cost savings today. And the cost savings is from the customer perspective. So interesting study that they did. If we can go on to the next slide, this is another example of implementing the time-sensitive value of efficiency for program design, and this is for a utility in Texas, which is Oncor. And lots of utilities in Texas offer residential, hard-to-reach, and commercial standard offer programs that provide a payment to the contractors based on the time-sensitive value of installed efficiency measures. And this slide shows an excerpt of the incentives for Oncor's Commercial Standard Offer Program for 2019. As you can see, they're paying an incentive for the dollars per kW for peak demand reduction, as well as the dollars per kWh for the annual energy reduction. We can go on to the next slide. My next example is switching over from efficiency to distribution system planning, and more specifically non-wires alternatives. And this is an example from the Pacific Northwest. Pacific Power and the Energy Trust of Oregon partnered together to implement a time and location-specific efficiency pilot to explore the opportunity to defer a substation upgrade. And they had a 2-year pilot that targeted quick deployment of efficiency measures for over 3,000 customers to reduce the substation load. And the pilot wrapped up in the second quarter of this year. And it didn't solve the feeder constraint, but Pacific Power still considered the pilot to be a success. And as you can see from this table, that does have their preliminary results, but the measures produced between 8 and 900 kW of savings from efficiency, depending on if you're looking at the summer or the winter. And so that was part of the reason that Pacific Power considered this a success, is because they were able to measure that impact. And those are specific to the feeder. And they also considered it a success because they built partnerships across their teams and their utility that hadn't been there prior. And they also realized that they could really quickly deploy efficiency measures. So they're continuing to consider what they can do with these lessons learned. Next slide, please. So another example from the Pacific Northwest, integrated resource planning from Pacificorp. And so the objective of long-term planning is to identify a resource portfolio and management strategy that provides an adequate and efficient and economic reliable power supply while controlling for risks. And Pacificorp creates energy efficiency cost curves using 8760 load shapes, which are inputs to the IRP capacity expansion model. And that's a little bit different than how most utilities consider efficiency in resource planning. And Pacificorp created 27 cost bundles that were available across all of their states that they work in. And that was 189 different supply curves. And this chart that's on the top shows the 20-year megawatt-hour potential for energy efficiency or Class 2 DSM bundles, and they're grouped together based on a range of dollars per megawatt-hour. So you can see the under $10 megawatt is quite large, under $10 a megawatt-hour bar. The first one that's listed there is quite large potential. To capture the time-varying impacts of the efficiency resources, each bundle has an 8760 load shape that specifies the capacity that's available in any hour of the year. And then the shapes are spread, they spread the savings across the 8760 shape, and they differentiate by state and sector and market segment, and account for variances in efficiency measures. And then they create these load profiles, and then the hourly impacts are aggregated together. So it's a pretty interesting way to look at efficiency. And then they allow efficiency to compete with all of their other resources to create the lowest cost, or to create a reliable portfolio at low cost. And that's what this chart on the bottom shows, which is the efficiency that was selected by the model for the 2019 IRP. And so this is Pacificorp's system load and resource balance, and it is the vertical axis is megawatts and the horizontal axis is years, and efficiency is the bar that grows over time on the very top. Next slide, please. My next example is on time-sensitive value in capacity markets. And this one is for ISO New England, and it's a regional grid operator that serves 6 New England states. And they have a forward capacity market that allows efficiency to participate and compete with other resources. And the auctions are held every 3 years, or they're held 3 years in advance of when the resource is going to be providing to the system. And efficiency competes with generation and demand response. Lowest price offers clear the auction, and then they are obligated to perform. So what this chart shows us is that over the last 3 forward capacity auctions, the amount of efficiency that's been included and selected and cleared is growing. So in 2017, 2018, and 2019, we went from 7 to 8 to 9% of the capacity that's being selected is efficiency. And in order to participate in the market, the efficiency has to perform during these hours, which are shown in this box over here to the left. So between 1 and 5 in the summer, and between 5 and 7 in the winter. It's worth noting that a few years ago, the forward capacity market was revised to include a pay-for-performance design. And under this design, if a resource delivers more energy during a scarcity condition, then they receive additional money. And if they don't perform the way they're supposed to, they're penalized. And efficiency was initially exempt from that. And now participants in the New England market are exploring ways that performance of efficiency can be assessed during those scarcity conditions. And so they're starting to look at approaches that can estimate their efficiency performance in all hours of the year, not just during these designated performance hours. So that's something that's ongoing. Next slide, please. Okay, rate design. So utilities aren't considering the time-sensitive value of efficiency for the most part in rate design, but they have considered how to use rates to integrate other distributed energy resources. And rate design, when combined with the time-sensitive value of efficiency, could improve the customer value proposition of efficiency and also influence the adoption of efficiency and other DERs. And I have some examples here of residential rates that could be used to improve the value proposition. There's default time of use rate in California and being piloted in Minnesota. In Arizona, it's optional, and also in Illinois. So those are some examples. And then non-residential customers, there's too many different rate structure types to give good examples there, but we do have a little bit more information in the appendix of the report on this. But a demand charge, whether it's from a customer's non-coincident peak, when the customer's highest consumption is occurring, or if their demand charge, so saving energy during their demand charge is going to reduce their bill and also potentially help out the electricity system as well. So that's time varying value efficiency could be useful to commercial customers as well. Next slide, please. Okay, so my last example is on state and local government activities. And there's limited but growing examples of states that are employing the time-sensitive value of efficiency in their state and local government activities. The examples that we have here are requiring utilities to or compensating utility for peak demand reductions from efficiency. So there's a handful of states that have peak demand reduction requirements in their energy efficiency resource standards or other regulations. And then several states give the utility an opportunity to earn financial incentives if they achieve a peak demand savings target. And then also California uses time-dependent valuation in its building energy code. We can go on to the next slide. Okay, moving on to our conclusions. If we go once more, thank you. So some conclusions from looking at this work. The time-sensitive value of efficiency is important, and there's lots of examples of how different utilities and states and actors are using it. And it can be helpful to help everyone craft efficiency plans and programs and target savings when they're going to be most valuable to the grid. Each of our 5 use cases has examples of how using the time-sensitive value of efficiency can improve the effectiveness. And we have a growing number of examples to build on. Some of the examples I have in this presentation I didn't even have in the paper because they're so new. And states and utilities can start using the time-sensitive value of efficiency by considering it in any of the use cases that we discussed. And also the data granularity that's required. You don't have to use 8760 data to do the time-sensitive value of efficiency, depending on what your goals are, depending on what you're trying to achieve. You can use bigger chunks of time. You don't have to get down to that really fine level of granularity for every example that you're looking into. And if we go on to the next slide, I have some resources available. These are all links to other research that we've done at LB&L on time and locational varying value of efficiency and other DERs. And so you can click through those. The one in the middle is our end-use load profile work, which is we're working with NREL to create end-use load profiles that are representative of the residential and commercial building stock. So that's something that's going to be very useful for the time-sensitive value of efficiency. Lots of other interesting research. And if we go on to our next slide, I think that we are going to open it up to discussion, and Lisa is going to lead us with that.
Great. Thanks, Natalie and David. We have some questions that came in through the chat box. And for all of you listening to the webinar, this is your opportunity now to enter questions into the chat box, and we'll take them as we have time until the top of the hour. So first, Natalie, a question for you. Beyond rate design, is there a programmatic way to share the higher value of energy efficiency that's designed to be, time-sensitive value with participants, particularly thinking about commercial buildings? And the person who has this question is thinking about, the split incentive issue. between landlords and tenants, and maybe there's some lessons learned that can be adopted there. So other programmatic ways besides rate design to sort of share with customers the increased value of time sensitivity for energy efficiency.
Sure. I think that there's two components to sharing that value with customers. They have to be aware of the energy that they're consuming. So, any kind of energy tracking information that can be made available to the customer is going to be useful, whether if that's through some kind of, like Nest learning thermostat type thing, or a building automation system, or an energy management system, or something that's going to provide information back to the customer about when they're saving and using energy is one component of it. And then the other component of it is, access to a price that's going to reflect, that's going to change in one way or another, depending on when the energy is being consumed. So commercial customers that have a demand charge can focus on energy savings that are going to bring that demand charge down. If they're able to participate in a time of use or some other type of rate structure where they have on and off peak prices that can send that same price signal. If they're able to participate in a wholesale market through aggregators or through probably through aggregators, they could bid their efficiency or demand response into a market in that way and see the benefit of reducing energy and lining up with the price values there. So those are a few options.
Great, thanks, Natalie. And David, your shameless plug for Grid Interactive Efficient Buildings appears to have piqued interest. There's a question: what are the sources for the charts that you used in your portion of the presentation, and where can folks find out more information?
The sources are.
Sorry, I should have said that. I thought we were talking about the ERCOT slides, which I can talk about those where those sources are. But David, sorry, you should talk about the GEB ones.
Sure. On the GEB ones, they were done for DOE, and so you can find them again at the BTO website, and within that we have what we call the GEB site. So the URL is too long, so just again, we'll post it, or just Google BTO and DOE and GEB, G-E-B, and you'll find that and a bunch of other graphics you can use.
Great, and I'll take the opportunity to make a shameless plug for the forthcoming Berkeley Lab reports that we're doing for David's office on Grid Interactive Efficient Buildings. We have one that's sort of an introduction to state and local governments. We have one on how do you make enhancements to valuation during the planning stage to take into account demand flexibility that can come from Grid Interactive Buildings. And we also have one on retrospective assessments of Grid Interactive Efficient Buildings, and how can you tell that they actually performed like you were hoping they would. Let's move on to another question for Natalie. This is a really great question, and a lot of folks have this. Is advanced metering infrastructure required to take into account time-sensitive value of energy efficiency in programs and policies? And then how might utilities without AMI deployment take advantage of the strategies you talked about?
Sure. So AMI is not required. It's certainly useful. Anytime you can have access to more granular data, it can help inform decision making, but access to other information sources like I was saying, smart thermostats or building automation systems or energy management systems are also going to provide customers with that same kind of information. For utilities who don't have AMI deployment, I think you can also learn from other utilities in your region. If you're using this data for planning purposes, you can look at what end-use load profiles and load research and what other people in your region are doing, if that's from evaluation, measurement, and verification studies, or any source that's starting to gather up how customers are using electricity can be helpful within your region. So, taking things that are being done around you, and then also, you could start thinking about doing not pilot programs, but metering. You could think about doing circuit level metering like they are in the Northwest, and that doesn't require AMI data. to get a better understanding of what's happening within your region. That's also what I think Navigant did for Massachusetts for their end-use load profile study that they did, which was one of the graphics that was in David's slides up front. So it's not required, and there are other ways to learn. I also encourage you to look at the end-use load profile project link that LBNL and NREL and Argonne are working on. That's also funded by Building Technologies Office. We are looking at all kinds of different data sources, trying to figure out how to calibrate models so that there'll be, all of these end-use load profiles available everywhere, which will also, you don't need AMI data to use those. So.
Hey, this is David. Let me add to this, like the earlier question. When you think not about the user side, you don't. Not only, as Natalie said, do you not need AMI, but there's almost every program that a utility or a state or other governmental body can run can look at TSV. I gave the example earlier of an R&D program, but let's pick a utility rebate incentives. One can design, and this is a way to share the benefits, by the way, with end users, as was asked earlier. Utilities can design their rebate programs to focus on, which efficiency solutions provide the most value, not just the most kWh, but the most value, and then set rebate levels accordingly. You can do the same with labeling. Energy Star can't do TSV because it's typically it's a federal program and it covers the whole country. But what it does do for select products is if they are connected, they get extra credit in the Energy Star system. So that's a proxy, not quite the same thing. And we can go through all of them. So I think there's plenty of opportunity here. It doesn't get us out of what Natalie's been talking about. How do you get the information to design one that reflects the values in your community? But once that's done, then you can implement it all sorts of ways.
Great, thanks. Let's move on to the next question here. So this is a sort of a comment that came in. If we overemphasize the time-sensitive value of efficiency, are we sort of prone to falling into a sort of a niche approach where we don't do full-scale, all-out, acquisition of energy efficiency for a bunch of reasons, including, concerns about, air pollution and climate? So could you address this concern? Maybe, I don't know if you want to start with David perhaps here.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Lisa. I don't know what to say. If I understand the question correctly, I think you're saying why isn't efficiency adopted more than it is, even when it's cost effective? And if that's the question, that's a long-standing and it's a tough one. I don't think TSV is not going to, time-sensitive valuation is not going to solve that. I don't even know if it contributes to it, except just on any of these times, whenever we promote any energy solution, whether it's solar or natural gas or efficiency or demand response, you want to get the numbers right. What this does is help get the numbers right, and I think we'll just sort of let the numbers speak for themselves. And once that's implemented, then promote informed decisions. So if I understood the question right, I'm not sure how to help.
Right. I think that's the question ultimately, and I think what you're saying is, the focus on time-sensitive value isn't really, in my view, speaking for myself, it's not going to diminish acquisition of efficiency. In fact, it could increase it by, having folks look for greater value. All right.
That's right. The famous line they asked Willie Sutton, why does he rob banks? He goes, well, that's where all the money is. And so if I can indulge the metaphor, if one can do it, there's more money robbing banks than robbing, 7-Elevens. And so I hope this isn't being recorded because I'll probably hear about this. But anyhow, seriously, why? Let's find energy efficiency at those times during peak demand or during high expensive times when the system's stressed, and it'll be more valuable, and we'll get better. It'll get more and better answers.
All right, let's move on. We have a bunch of other questions. Natalie, are there specific policies that local governments, like cities and counties, should be thinking about to foster both time-sensitive value of efficiency and also greener, active, efficient buildings?
Yeah, I think Lisa is you're probably best qualified to talk about the grid interactive efficient buildings given your forthcoming report. But for time-sensitive value of efficiency, I think there's, states, local government can start thinking about first starting with what their energy data is and how they're gathering that data and what they have available to them, and then starting to build up, what are their goals and how can you use this data to support those goals. So, I think it's initially you just need to start if you need to create a policy to find out what kind of information you have available and how you can gather it and how you can start to aggregate it in one place so that people can better understand what's happening. That's certainly a great step moving forward. And then also just, starting to figure out how do you want to use efficiency to achieve your goals, and focusing your efforts there are also a good place to start.
Great, thanks. Let's move on to another question here. We have, this is also a really good one and from a former colleague. Would large-scale implementation of demand response potentially decrease the time value of energy efficiency? And you can address other interactions that you've thought about.
That's a great question. I think it also depends on what else is happening on the larger electricity system and how the values are being determined. So I think that could be a potential outcome. If all of the electricity becomes less expensive and the avoided costs also go down, then the value of all of the resources is declining. So it could lower the time-sensitive value of efficiency or anything else. It also could create certain hours that are worth significantly more than other hours, so it could increase it. It also depends on your efficiency measure, right? So if your measure is saving electricity when it's still expensive to produce electricity, then you're going to see higher values. So I think, that could be a possible outcome. It doesn't necessarily mean that it will be an outcome, and certainly it's going to be different in different parts of the country based on how their electricity system is changing looking to the future.
Oh, great. And this is sort of an offer. Are DOE and Berkeley Lab looking for metered data on time-sensitive values for efficiency? I knew that would elicit a quick response. In Vermont, they're working with this data and could potentially share it if it's useful. And so the question is, how can folks get involved if they have data or research that may be helpful here?
If we go to the next slide, there's my email. Just shoot me an email.
Natalie, I also think it's a good opportunity for you to talk briefly about another piece of work that you're involved with and Andy Satchwell is leading for us on interactions between efficiency and demand response. That's something that the Building Technologies Office at DOE also is funding.
Yeah, that's a forthcoming report that there's several of us at LBNL working on, and we're considering the impacts of efficiency and demand response and how under different system conditions, efficiency and DR may either complement or compete with each other. And the first phase of that project is this report that is going to hopefully come out in the next few months and talks about this framework that we've created to consider efficiency and demand response measures together. And then the next phase of the project after that is that we'll be doing some modeling to actually dig down into what the impact of increased efficiency or demand response are together on the electricity systems, because as we went through creating our framework, we found that the answer of if increasing efficiency or demand response was complementary or challenging each other, we had a lot of maybe answers, and so the modeling I think will help shake out some of those answers, but it's a very interesting project, and I don't think we have anything publicly available yet, but we should soon.
All right, great. And there's a question about communication between loads and appliances and other equipment in buildings. Are there protocols being developed or in use for communicating load shed with appliances and equipment in buildings? David, maybe this is a question for you or Jack. Or Natalie.
Yeah.
We don't know the answer to that, and we'll dig around. Often, there are protocols, plural, and therein lies the problem, as long as the protocols can work with each other. But certainly different vendors have proprietary systems, but that's the questions about beyond that.
All right, thanks. And of course, in the Pacific Northwest, Bonneville has been working on some, water heater protocols. So that's just, I think, one example. There's also a question here about the reconciling the cost of getting data through metering with the need for precision in measuring actual performance. And so how do you sort of do the trade-offs between the precision that you feel like you may need in measuring performance of efficiency on a time-sensitive basis and the cost of the data, the metering and so forth that are needed? And do you really need to separately meter all these different components to capture these values?
Yeah, that's really at the heart of this end-use load profile project that what we're working on with NREL is looking at. Obviously having metered data is very expensive, but very useful. And so in absence of being able to spend hundreds of millions of dollars collecting data for the entire country, using building energy models and calibrating those so that they are as accurate as can be is a hybrid approach that we are hoping is going to achieve the best level of accuracy for what a reasonable price is. And so I think it's a challenge that a lot of people struggle with for, spending money on metering versus spending money on really anything else. So it is a challenge. We're trying to, this big project that BTO is funding is trying to help out with that by providing end-use load profiles that can be used for planning and for, all of these different use cases that I've talked about plus more. They'll be out in about a year and a half, so they're not in hand right now, but that's one thing, one effort that DOE is making to try and mitigate that challenge.
Yeah, let me underscore that. We want this to be user-friendly. We don't want, nor do we think it has to be 8760 times X climate zones within your jurisdiction times this and that. So we are looking for ways to get those kinds of, let's say, shortcuts where you can be much less granular and still get most of the value. And if you think about it, there's weekday, weekend, summer, winter, shoulder. I'm not saying that's the right solution, but there's a lot you can do without 8760 data and without collecting one's own data. So stay tuned on that. That is, as Natalie just said, that is a priority for DOE, and we'll be back. We'll let you know as that progresses.
All right. Here's a good question for I think Natalie. How do I know if the utilities in my state are using the time-sensitive value of efficiency?
Yeah, I think that's a little bit similar to what I tried to answer for what local government can do with time-sensitive value. You can obviously ask your utility what they're doing and find out what level of granularity they're using for whatever process you're interested in, whether that's efficiency planning or integrated resource planning or transmission planning or whatever, distribution system planning, non-wires alternatives, and find out, if they're using one value for the entire year, then it's, not really looking at the time-sensitive value. And as things get divided up more granularly, as David was saying, you can have weekday, weekend, on-peak, off-peak. You can start to see differences in the trends between the values and the savings associated with those different times. So identifying the process that you are most interested in, talking to your utility, and then, starting to look into how they're considering the efficiency with their other resources are good places to start for trying to decide or find out how your utility is thinking about the time-sensitive value of efficiency.
All right, great. We're at time. So I want to thank everyone who joined us today. Thank our presenters, Natalie Mims-Frick and David Nemso with Berkeley Lab and U.S. Department of Energy. The slides and a webinar recording will be posted on Berkeley Lab's website. And the future reports also will be posted there, so stay tuned, and we'll look forward to talking with you on a future webinar about additional work. Thanks very much. Have a good day.